We're going to be talking, Mika, of course, off the top of the show about the 2-hour phone call that President Trump had with Vladimir Putin, and not a lot of movement towards a ceasefire. The president said afterwards that there were some positive steps forward, but there is no doubt the biggest problem right now is that Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace, doesn't want a ceasefire. And as Marco Rubio said a month or two ago, he said, we're going to know very soon who's responsible for the continued war. Over that last month and a half, Vladimir Putin has made certain the world knows it is on him. He does not want peace. He doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want anything to do with the end of this war.
President Trump held this hours-long phone call with Vladimir Putin yesterday, and Trump posted on social media afterwards that he believed the call went very well and called for direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine toward a ceasefire and an end to the war. Trump wrote those terms will now be negotiated directly between the two countries themselves. Putin, for his part, was quoted as telling Russian media the phone call was very informative and very open. Later in the day, in the Oval Office, President Trump spoke to reporters about the call.
Mr. President, on Ukraine and on your call today that you had with President Putin, you said last week that you thought nothing was going to happen, no advances would be made until you and Putin got together. Do you still feel that way?
I think something's going to happen. It's a got very big egos involved, I tell you. Big egos involved. But I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'd just back away and they're going to have to keep going. Again, this was a European situation. It should have remained a European situation. But I did say it's time. You got to stop this thing. And I believe he wants to stop. Look, I would be, I think, very able to tell whether or not he wanted to or what. I thought there was a very good chance, like a 50-50 chance, that he would say, I want to take the whole thing. I didn't know what he was going to say. And then they have a different kind of a problem. But I believe he wants to stop.
You mentioned that you believe Putin wants peace, but he just attacked Ukraine yesterday. So what makes you think that he wants peace?
Well, he's in a war, you know. I mean, nobody said don't. They're fighting. They're attacking each other. And people are dying all the time. He's in a war. He's fighting a war. Nobody said he was going to stop. I think, is it terrible? Yeah, it's terrible. I think it's terrible.
President Trump spoke one-on-one with Ukrainian President Zelensky prior to his call with Putin, and again afterwards in a conference call with other NATO leaders. In a briefing yesterday, Zelensky acknowledged Trump's call for direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. However, he said Ukraine is still considering another high-level round of talks between American, Russian, and European officials. And Joe, I think that the lead out of all of that was President Trump hinting that if it continues, he'll back away and they'll keep going. That's a far cry from him saying he could end this in a day.
Well, I think several things came out of it. The first thing that came out of it was that he said it was positive talks. They're going to continue. He thinks the two should get together and talk more specifically. Also said that he thought that Vladimir Putin did want peace. But the war, of course, still going on. And the question is, of course, whether, in fact, that is the case or not. And if he does want peace, Vladimir Putin will not want peace out of the goodness of his heart. He'll want peace because, well, first of all, there's the economic drain with this, not only this war and sanctions, also the price of oil plunging the way it has. He may, and of course, the casualties that just keep piling up. I suspect he even knows that continuing this war in the same manner that it's been fought over the past 2 years is just not possible for either side. But again, right now, the negotiations continue. To talk about that, let's bring in NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons from Dubai. Also retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. His military career spans more than 3 decades of service, including as a commanding general of U.S. Army Europe and the 7th army. Keir, let's begin with you. What can you tell us about the call yesterday and Russia's response?
Well, Joe, just to underscore what you've been saying, here's the point. President Putin does want the war to stop on his terms. That's what he said again and again. He walked out of that call yesterday, went straight in front of the cameras, Russian state media, and said it again. We want our core interests to be addressed. The root causes, he calls it. By that, he means he doesn't want Ukraine any closer to Europe. He doesn't want Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to be mostly neutral. All those things that we've heard again and again. That call that President Trump had with President Putin did not change that. President Trump says that he may back away. He's already backing away. He was said just days ago that the only way to solve this was a face-to-face meeting between him and President Putin. Now, apparently, that isn't going to happen for some time, while there are direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. President Zelensky and the Europeans are very, very worried about a particular question. What does backing away mean by President Trump? Does that backing away mean that he just leaves the negotiations to Russia and Ukraine? Or does backing away mean that he withdraws again intelligence support for Ukraine, this kind of security support that the Europeans just can't provide? Now, but this is a very fast-moving, complicated picture. There are lots of things happening. There's a bill in Congress that Secretary of State Rubio said over the weekend the White House is not able to prevent the progress of, that would really enforce tougher sanctions and more sanctions on the Russians. The White House approved the moving of Patriot missile defense systems to Ukraine just in the past few weeks. So what President Trump says and what's actually happening, just like in his first term, are not necessarily the same. And in some ways, we're seeing a repeat of that first term. It's like the bromance is back on. What the Russians said about the call was that President Putin began by congratulating President Trump on the birth of his grandchild, that they called each other by their first names, that they didn't want the call to end. The two presidents wanted to just keep going. So all very friendly, but no prize. Sort of, friends with no benefits, if you like. And that is a repeat, frankly, of what the Russians think happened in the first term, which was that they seemed to have a great relationship between their presidents, but didn't get any kind of resolution in the relationship with the United States. So we are no further forward. President Putin has not shifted. Despite Steve Witkoff saying over the weekend that the force of President Trump's personality would shift the logjam, was his words. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen on the call yesterday. And I think the historians may look back on this moment and say this was the moment that the US did begin to step back. It's interesting to hear Steve Witkoff talk. He will say, well, it's a really complicated war. It's very difficult to solve. You think? It's very similar to what he says about Gaza. It's really complicated. It's really hard to stop that war, even though that was his role. There are still hostages being held. And now, of course, Steve Witkoff is moving on to negotiate the Iran deal. I think we're clearer at this stage, honestly, when you look past the rhetoric about where things stand. I think the war continues. There's no sign of a ceasefire. And both the Russians and Ukrainians will continue to work to try to get what they want from the White House, while certainly the Russians and to some extent the Ukrainians believe they can still gain if the conflict continues. Because the Russians think they're winning, even though there's not a doubt about that when you actually look at the battlefield. And the Ukrainians think that over time, the Russians will begin to struggle to supply more troops to the military, more recruits to the military. So far, they're really able to still funnel the troops to the military, but that may not be the case in years to come. It's going to take some time, though. It's bitterly disappointing, honestly, for anyone who would hope to see peace in Ukraine.
Friends without benefits. Many things have been said of the Putin-Trump relationship. Keir, you added one to the top of the list. Friends without benefits. Keir Simmons, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated.